A millionaire dismissed his wife's profession and took his mistress to a gala instead. What he discovered later made him regret it all. Lucas Donovan was a man who thrived on success. Every aspect of his life was carefully curated to reflect his hard-earned status. Whether it was the immaculate penthouse overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, the designer suits tailored to perfection, or the exclusive clubs where his name carried weight. To the world, Lucas embodied power and ambition. A man who had climbed his way to the top and had no intentions of slowing down. Yet, beneath the polished surface, there was a growing dissatisfaction that he couldn't quite put into words. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the shadows of his achievements, whispering doubts he didn't dare confront. And nothing exemplified this unease more than his marriage to Emily. Emily had once been the grounding force in his life. She was kind, compassionate, and selfless in ways that made Lucas feel almost undeserving of her love. Her work as a nurse consumed her, filling her days and nights with purpose, while Lucas navigated the ruthless world of corporate takeovers and high-stakes negotiations. They had been opposites from the start, and for a time, that contrast had fascinated him. But now, it felt like a chasm growing wider with each passing day. Lucas sat in his sleek, modern office at home, the city lights casting a cool glow across the room. A glass of expensive scotch rested in his hand, the ice clinking softly as he swirled it absent-mindedly. His thoughts were elsewhere, on the upcoming Donovan Corporation Gala, an event that would host some of the most influential names in the business world. Deals would be made, partnerships solidified, and reputations defined. And for Lucas, image was everything. His phone buzzed beside him, drawing him out of his thoughts. A message from Victoria, the woman who had been occupying more of his time and mind than he cared to admit. Tomorrow's going to be unforgettable, Lucas. Can't wait to be by your side. Victoria was the epitome of sophistication, elegant, poised, and utterly devoted to the glamorous lifestyle Lucas had cultivated. She understood the importance of appearances, of charm, of saying the right things at the right moments. With her, there were no awkward conversations about long hospital shifts or concerns about patients. Everything was effortless, and that was precisely why Lucas found himself drawn to her. He glanced at the framed photo of his wedding day sitting on the bookshelf. Emily's eyes sparkled with genuine happiness, her face radiant and untouched by the artifice that defined his world. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He loved Emily. At least, he told himself he did. But love wasn't always enough, was it? The sound of the front door opening pulled him from his thoughts. Emily walked in, her scrubs slightly wrinkled, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked exhausted, but still managed to smile at him. "Hey," she greeted softly, setting down her bag and walking over to him. "Long day?" Lucas forced a smile. "Yeah, just trying to get everything ready for the gala." He hesitated for a moment before adding, "Listen, about the gala, I was thinking, maybe you should sit this one out." Emily froze mid-step, blinking at him. "What?" Lucas leaned back in his chair, carefully crafting his words. "It's going to be a really long night, Em. A lot of standing, talking business. I just don't want you to feel out of place." A flicker of something passed through Emily's eyes. Hurt, confusion, maybe both. "Out of place," she repeated slowly, her voice quieter now. "Lucas, I always go with you to these things. I know how important they are." He sighed, placing the glass down with a deliberate clink. "I know, but this year's different. It's a bigger deal than usual. I need to be fully focused." Emily crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "So I'm a distraction now?" "That's not what I meant." Lucas rubbed his temples, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. I don't want to have to worry about whether you're enjoying yourself or not. These events aren't exactly fun." She studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. "Lucas," she said softly, "is there something you're not telling me?" He opened his mouth to respond, but the words felt heavy in his throat. Instead, he shook his head. "No, of course not. I just think you'd be more comfortable staying home this time." There it was, the final nail in the coffin of their unspoken argument. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, and after a beat, she nodded. "If that's what you want," she said quietly, turning away to head to the kitchen. Lucas watched her go, a sinking feeling settling in his chest. He told himself this was the right decision, that Emily would be happier at home, away from the judgmental eyes of his peers. And yet, the guilt gnawed at him, unrelenting. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Emily asleep beside him, Lucas stared at the ceiling. His mind wouldn't settle, replaying their conversation over and over. He glanced at his phone once more, Victoria's name lighting up the screen. "It'll be just us. You won't regret it." He hesitated for a moment before replying with a simple, "Can't wait." But even as he set his phone down, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything. Emily's steady breathing beside him only made it worse. She trusted him implicitly, believed in him in a way no one else did. And yet, here he was, actively choosing to push her further away. The gala was going to be perfect, he reassured himself. He would walk in with Victoria, they would turn heads, and he would prove to everyone, to himself, that he was exactly where he belonged. And yet, deep down, a small voice whispered, "At what cost?" Before we dive into the next part of the story, let me ask you something. What would you have done if you were in Lucas's shoes? Would you have realized your mistake sooner, or do you think he's too late? Let me know in the comments below. And hey, if you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. Now, let's see what happens next. Lucas Donovan adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror, the soft glow of the penthouse lights reflecting off the polished silver. The anticipation buzzed beneath his skin, a mixture of excitement and guilt that he was all too familiar with by now. He straightened his tie, a deep navy silk that Victoria had picked out for him, subtle yet sophisticated, just like her. She understood him in ways Emily never could. Emily. He cast a quick glance towards the bedroom, where the soft hum of the shower drifted through the closed door. She had barely spoken since their conversation about the gala. Lucas knew she was hurt, but he told himself it was for the best. She wouldn't fit in, and deep down, she probably knew it. He had convinced himself that sparing her from the scrutiny of his colleagues was an act of kindness, not cowardice. His phone buzzed on the dresser. "Victoria, I'll meet you at the entrance. Tonight's going to be perfect." Lucas exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Victoria was stunning, ambitious, and most importantly, eager to stand by his side. She was the kind of woman who could turn heads and command attention in the way he needed. Emily, on the other hand, would have been content standing quietly in a corner, sipping water, and looking for a way to slip out early. The thought should have brought him relief, but instead, it left a hollow ache in his chest. "Lucas." Emily's voice was soft, hesitant. He turned to see her standing at the bedroom doorway, a towel wrapped around her damp hair, her face bare and tired from the long shift at the hospital. "Are you sure about tonight? About me staying home?" He forced a reassuring smile, crossing the room and pressing a quick kiss to her forehead. "Of course, Em. It's just work stuff. Nothing you'd enjoy." She studied him for a moment, searching his face with those earnest hazel eyes that once made him feel like a better man. "I just feel like something's off lately," she murmured. "Like you're different." Lucas stiffened, forcing a chuckle. "Come on, Em. You're reading too much into things. It's just stress. Big clients, big deals." Emily nodded, but the doubt lingered in her expression. "I trust you, Lucas," she said finally. Those words felt like a weight pressing against his chest, and for a split second, he considered telling her everything. The doubts, the temptations, the truth. But instead, he offered another tight smile and stepped back. "I should get going. I'll be late." As he grabbed his coat and headed for the door, Emily stood silently in the hallway, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite place. The Donovan Corporation Gala was everything Lucas had envisioned. Grand chandeliers casting soft golden light across the towering ballroom, the low hum of jazz mingling with the chatter of New York's most powerful elites. It was the kind of place where deals were made with a handshake and fortunes exchanged over a glass of champagne. Victoria was already waiting for him by the entrance, draped in an emerald green gown that accentuated her flawless figure. She greeted him with a dazzling smile, looping her arm through his as though she belonged there. Because, in her mind, she did. "You look amazing," Lucas said, his voice low and appreciative. "I always do," Victoria teased, squeezing his arm. "But tonight, we're a perfect match." As they stepped into the heart of the gala, Lucas felt a rush of pride. Heads turned. People noticed. This was exactly what he had wanted, to be seen, admired, envied. And yet, with every passing conversation, with every glass of champagne, a nagging thought lingered in the back of his mind. Emily should have been here. The laughter, the polished small talk, the empty compliments. None of it felt quite as satisfying as he had imagined. Victoria, for all her charm and beauty, didn't have Emily's warmth. She didn't ask about his day, didn't know the way he liked his coffee, didn't understand the small things that Emily had never had to ask about. "Lucas," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Richard Sinclair, one of his most valuable business contacts. "Good to see you." "Richard," Lucas greeted with a firm handshake. "How's the wife?" Richard smiled fondly. "She's great. Couldn't make it tonight. Volunteering at the hospital. You know how she is." Lucas nodded, feeling a pang of something close to guilt. Emily would have liked Richard's wife. They had the same quiet compassion, the same dedication to helping others. Victoria leaned in, her voice silky smooth. "Lucas has been telling me all about his expansion plans," she purred, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Richard's gaze flickered between them, something unreadable in his expression. "Expansion? Huh? Well, I hope Emily's on board with all these changes." Lucas stiffened, but forced a smile. "She's supportive." As Richard excused himself to mingle, Victoria turned to Lucas with a small smirk. "You seem tense," she whispered. Lucas swallowed hard. "It's nothing," but it was something. He felt it growing with every passing moment, a gnawing sense of unease that even Victoria's charm couldn't quite chase away. Meanwhile, back at home, Emily sat curled up on the couch, the flickering light of the television playing across her face. The empty space beside her felt heavier than usual. She tried to focus on the movie playing, but her mind kept drifting back to Lucas, to the way he had been distant lately. She had always known their worlds were different. His sleek, high-powered life and her simple, fulfilling career. But they had made it work. Or so she thought. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend, Sarah. "You okay, Em? Thought you'd be at the gala tonight." Emily hesitated before typing back. "Lucas thought it would be better if I stayed home." There was a pause before Sarah replied. "That doesn't sound like him. Is everything all right?" Emily stared at the screen, biting her lip. Was it? She wanted to believe Lucas's explanation, that he was just under pressure, but deep down, there was a nagging feeling that something was slipping between them. Something she wasn't sure she could hold onto much longer. She glanced over at the framed wedding photo on the shelf, her fingers tracing the edges. They had built a life together, a love that had once felt unshakable. But tonight, she couldn't help but wonder if Lucas was standing in a crowded ballroom with someone else by his side. And for the first time in their marriage, she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. At the gala, Lucas stood by the balcony, staring out at the city lights. Victoria was busy chatting with some executives, but Lucas felt strangely disconnected from it all. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his messages until he found Emily's name. His finger hovered over the screen, the urge to text her almost overwhelming. But before he could decide, Victoria's hand slipped around his waist, drawing him back into the party with a coy smile. "Come on, Lucas," she whispered. "Let's enjoy the night." And just like that, the moment passed, and Lucas let himself be pulled further into a night he wasn't sure he wanted anymore. The ballroom shimmered under the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the mingling scents of expensive perfume and finely aged whiskey. The Donovan Corporation Gala was in full swing, a sea of tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns, each attendee a carefully curated piece in the grand puzzle of high society. Lucas Donovan stood in the center of it all, a picture of effortless charm and confidence, his arm draped casually around Victoria's slender waist. Victoria, as always, was the perfect accessory, draped in emerald satin that hugged every curve, her makeup flawless, her smile practiced to perfection. She fit seamlessly into the world Lucas had built for himself, a world of polished facades and carefully constructed illusions. She laughed at the right jokes, charmed the right investors, and never once made him feel like he was anything less than the king of his empire. But beneath the surface, Lucas felt an itch he couldn't quite scratch. He knew how to play the game, flashing a smile at the right moment, offering firm handshakes, nodding along to conversations about stocks and acquisitions. But tonight, it felt hollow. The laughter around him was too loud, the smiles too forced, and every now and then, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered Emily's name. Lucas. Victoria's voice was smooth, velvety. You're zoning out on me. Lucas blinked, pulling himself back to the present. Sorry, just thinking about a deal I'm working on. Victoria rolled her eyes playfully, nudging him with her hip. You never stop working, do you? She leaned in, her lips grazing his ear. Relax. Enjoy the night. We look good together, don't we? Lucas forced a smirk. We always do. But even as he said it, his eyes drifted across the room. Conversations buzzed, champagne glasses clinked, and everywhere he looked, he saw people playing roles, partners whispering calculated words, rivals exchanging subtle barbs. And then his eyes landed on Richard Sinclair again, standing by the bar, laughing with a group of executives. Richard caught Lucas's gaze and lifted his glass in a silent toast. Lucas returned the gesture, though something in Richard's expression unsettled him. A knowing look, a subtle disapproval that Lucas couldn't shake. Victoria, sensing his distraction, tightened her grip on his arm. Come on, let's dance. Lucas let her pull him toward the dance floor, the music shifting into something slow and seductive. He placed his hands on her waist, moving with the rhythm, but his mind was elsewhere. Emily wouldn't have liked this. She hated these kinds of events, too loud, too shallow, too much artifice. She would have been standing off to the side, smiling politely but counting the minutes until they could leave. A pang of guilt settled in his chest, but he pushed it down. He had made his choice. He belonged here, didn't he? Back at home, Emily sat curled up on the couch, the muted flicker of the television playing across her face. The air in the apartment felt heavier than usual, as though it were holding onto something unspoken. She picked at the edge of her blanket, her mind wandering back to Lucas's parting words earlier that evening. I don't want you to feel out of place. Emily had smiled and nodded, but the words had lingered in her mind ever since. She didn't want to admit it, but a part of her wondered if that was just his way of saying I don't want you there. She sighed, glancing down at the phone in her lap. No messages. No updates. She tried not to check it too often, but the temptation was there. A quick text, just to see how he was doing. But she didn't. Instead, she picked up the remote and switched the channel, trying to focus on something, anything, that wasn't Lucas at the gala with his so-called colleagues. Her best friend, Sarah, had texted earlier, asking if she wanted to go out for drinks. Emily had declined, offering the excuse of exhaustion. But the truth was, she didn't feel like pretending everything was fine. She looked over at the framed wedding photo sitting on the shelf. The two of them, smiling in the golden sunlight, Lucas holding her close like she was the most precious thing in his life. It felt like a lifetime ago. Emily swallowed hard, shaking the thought away. She wouldn't let herself spiral. She trusted Lucas. She had to. Back at the gala, Lucas was growing increasingly restless. He stood by the bar now, Victoria chatting animatedly with a group of executives, but his mind was elsewhere. The guilt gnawed at him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Emily's absence should have been a relief. He had convinced himself of that, but instead, it felt like something was missing. Lucas, Richard Sinclair's voice broke through his thoughts. Nice turnout tonight. Lucas turned, forcing a grin. Thanks, Richard. Always a pleasure to see you. Richard sipped his drink, eyeing Victoria briefly before returning his gaze to Lucas. So, where's Emily tonight? Lucas felt his stomach tighten. He kept his tone light, casual. She wasn't feeling up to it. These things aren't really her scene. Richard nodded slowly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Well, that's a shame. She's a remarkable woman. There was something pointed in his tone, something that made Lucas shift uncomfortably. Yeah, she is. Richard studied him for a moment longer before offering a tight smile. You know, Lucas, success is a funny thing. It has a way of making us forget what's really important. Lucas bristled. I haven't forgotten anything. Richard chuckled, setting his drink down on the bar. Good. Just make sure you don't. As Richard walked away, Lucas felt an unsettling weight in his chest. He glanced down at his phone, his thumb hovering over Emily's contact. For a moment, he considered calling her, but then Victoria's laughter rang out behind him, pulling him back into the moment. The night stretched on, filled with the hollow echo of conversation and clinking glasses. Lucas played his part, smiling, laughing, shaking hands. But inside, he felt like he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't quite define. Victoria leaned in close, her lips brushing against his ear. You're distracted tonight. Lucas forced a smile, wrapping an arm around her waist. Just thinking about work. She pouted playfully. I thought tonight was about having fun. He kissed her temple absently, but his mind was elsewhere. As the crowd swirled around him, Lucas realized something that sent a cold shiver down his spine. He was surrounded by everything he thought he wanted, yet he had never felt more alone. Emily fell asleep on the couch, the faint glow of her phone screen illuminating the room. Lucas never called. She told herself it didn't matter, that he was busy. But deep down, an unease settled over her. Something was shifting between them, something she couldn't quite name. And for the first time in their marriage, she wasn't sure she wanted to know what it was. The grand ballroom buzzed with life, filled with the sounds of laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the smooth hum of jazz drifting from the live band in the corner. Waiters in crisp white shirts weaved through the crowd, balancing silver trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne, while clusters of New York's elite engaged in hushed yet animated conversations. Lucas Donovan stood in the center of it all, the embodiment of confidence and control. His hand rested lightly on Victoria's lower back as they worked the room, smiling at the right people, shaking hands, and exchanging pleasantries. On the surface, everything was perfect. Victoria, in her stunning emerald dress, radiated elegance and poise, drawing admiring glances from all directions. Lucas, dressed in a sleek tuxedo, felt at home in this world of wealth and influence. But deep down, something gnawed at him, an inexplicable tension that settled in his chest, making it harder to enjoy the night. He hadn't heard from Emily since he left the penthouse, and though he told himself she was probably watching one of her favorite medical dramas, a part of him wondered if she was sitting alone, feeling the growing distance between them as much as he did. Lucas took another sip of his drink, forcing himself to stay present. Victoria leaned in, her lips brushing against his ear as she whispered, "Stop thinking so much. You look tense." "I'm fine," he replied, offering her a tight smile. "Just a lot on my mind." Victoria gave him a knowing smirk, tugging him gently toward a group of executives. "Well, stop thinking and start networking." As the night wore on, Lucas moved through the event, shaking hands, smiling, and making small talk, but the hollow feeling persisted. It was during a particularly dull conversation with an investor that the first signs of trouble emerged. A commotion near the center of the ballroom caught his attention, murmurs rising, glasses clinking nervously. Guests began to shift uncomfortably, and Lucas craned his neck to see what was happening. A man, perhaps in his 60s, staggered backward, his face suddenly pale. His hand clutched at his chest, and within seconds, he collapsed onto the pristine marble floor. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Guests gasped, some stepping away in horror while others whispered frantically, "Someone call an ambulance." A woman's voice rang out in panic. Lucas's heart pounded. He recognized the man, Arthur Whitman, a key investor in one of his latest ventures. Victoria tightened her grip on his arm. "Lucas," she hissed, "do something." He swallowed hard, his mind racing. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't equipped to deal with this. "Call for medical staff." He barked at one of the hotel's managers, but the man looked just as stunned as everyone else. We have a first aid team." But what?" Lucas snapped, his frustration rising. The last thing he needed was to have Whitman collapse and, God forbid, die at an event under his name. Then, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Step aside." Lucas's head snapped up and his breath caught in his throat. Emily. She strode into the ballroom with her usual quiet confidence, her hospital ID still clipped to her scrub pocket. Her hazel eyes were focused, assessing the situation as she knelt beside Arthur, feeling for a pulse. The room was silent now, all eyes on her. Lucas could only stare in disbelief as his wife, the woman he had left at home, calmly took control of the situation without hesitation. "His pulse is weak," she said, her voice steady. "We need an ambulance now." A waiter scrambled to dial 911 as Emily opened her medical kit, which she had inexplicably brought with her. Lucas could see the practiced precision in every movement, checking Arthur's breathing, unbuttoning his collar, tilting his head slightly to ensure an open airway. Guests whispered amongst themselves, murmuring about how fortunate they were to have a medical professional present. Lucas could see the admiration on their faces, the same faces that he had feared would judge her presence at the event. "Does he have any known conditions?" Emily asked, glancing up at Lucas. He blinked, shaking himself out of his daze. Heart issues, I think. He mentioned it once." Emily nodded, pulling a small bottle of aspirin from her kit and slipping it under Arthur's tongue. "This should help until the paramedics arrive." Lucas stood frozen, watching his wife work with unwavering focus. For the first time in a long time, he saw her in a different light, not just as his quiet, unassuming wife, but as a force to be reckoned with. Victoria shifted uncomfortably beside him, her grip loosening on his arm. "Wow," she muttered, clearly not expecting Emily to handle the situation with such grace and skill. Within minutes, the paramedics arrived, and Emily efficiently briefed them on Arthur's condition. As they wheeled him out, a round of applause broke out across the ballroom. Lucas could see people nodding in approval, whispering to one another about how incredible Emily was, how lucky Lucas was to have her. He felt a sharp pang in his chest. "Lucky." Emily stood up, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, her eyes scanning the room until they locked with Lucas's. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "I didn't want to embarrass you," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough weight for only him to hear. "But I couldn't let someone die tonight." Lucas swallowed the lump in his throat. "Emily, she held up a hand, stopping him. "It's fine, Lucas. Go back to your gala." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit, leaving him standing there, speechless. The moment she was gone, Lucas felt the absence like a weight in the air. Around him, people were still murmuring, but it all faded into the background. He looked down at his drink, suddenly feeling like the most foolish man in the room. Victoria leaned in, her voice low and uncertain. "Lucas, are you okay?" For the first time that evening, he didn't care about appearances. He didn't care about Victoria, or the gala, or the deals. "I need some air," he muttered, stepping away. Lucas walked out onto the terrace, gripping the cold railing as the city stretched out below him. He took a deep breath, but it didn't help. The image of Emily, confident, composed, extraordinary, was seared into his mind. She had saved a man's life tonight, and he had been too ashamed to bring her here. Suddenly, the grand spectacle of the evening felt hollow. The glamorous crowd, the expensive wine, the deals, none of it mattered the way he thought it did. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas Donovan wasn't sure if he liked the man he had become. Lucas stood on the terrace, the crisp night air doing little to quell the storm raging inside him. The city lights stretched endlessly before him, a vast sea of possibilities and regrets. He loosened his tie, running a hand through his hair as he replayed the night's events in his mind. Emily, his sweet, simple, devoted wife, had just saved the life of one of the most important men in the room. And he had been too preoccupied with his carefully curated image to realize the true value of the woman he'd left behind. A soft click of heels against the marble floor signaled Victoria's arrival behind him. "Lucas," she said, her voice softer than usual, lacking its usual playful lilt. "You've been out here for a while." He didn't turn around. Instead, he stared out into the distance, his grip tightening on the cold railing. I just need a moment. Victoria sighed, stepping closer. Look, I get it. That was unexpected. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But let's be honest, Lucas. Emily doesn't belong here. She's great at what she does, sure, but these kinds of events, they aren't for people like her. Her words, once comforting, now felt like knives cutting through him. He turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. People like her? His voice was low, dangerous. Victoria faltered for a second, then laughed lightly, brushing a stray curl from her face. I didn't mean it like that. She stepped closer, resting a manicured hand on his chest. You and I, we understand this world. Emily doesn't. Lucas pulled away from her touch, his jaw tightening. He couldn't ignore the gnawing realization forming in his gut. Victoria was exactly what he thought he wanted, but tonight had shown him something he'd been blind to for far too long. I think I've made a mistake, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Victoria crossed her arms, her expression darkening. A mistake? Lucas, come on. You're overthinking this. She searched his face, trying to regain control of the situation. You brought me here because you wanted to, because you needed to. He didn't answer, because deep down, he wasn't sure anymore. As he turned to leave, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, and his heart sank when he saw Emily's name on the screen. A text message. Arthur's stable. He'll be fine. Thought you'd want to know. Lucas exhaled sharply, staring at the message longer than necessary. No anger, no accusations. Just a simple update, like she had always done, calm, composed, and reliable. He typed back quickly. Thank you. Are you home? Her reply came almost instantly. Yes. Don't worry about me. Enjoy your night. He swallowed hard, reading between the lines. Emily wasn't angry, at least, not in a way he could easily fix. She was beyond that. She had accepted the distance he had created between them, and that terrified him more than her anger ever could. Lucas turned back to Victoria. I think I'm going home. She stared at him, her expression slipping from charming to annoyed. Lucas, seriously? We haven't even closed the Peterson deal yet. People are going to notice if you leave now. He hesitated, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. But then he thought of Emily, sitting alone in their penthouse, probably still wearing those scrubs, the scent of antiseptic clinging to her skin. Let them notice, he said finally, his voice resolute. He turned and walked away, leaving Victoria standing alone under the glow of the chandeliers. The ride home felt longer than it should have. The streets were quieter now, the chaos of the gala left behind, but Lucas's thoughts were anything but still. He drummed his fingers against the leather seat of the town car, staring out the window as the city lights flickered past. He could almost hear Emily's voice in his head, telling him that he was overcomplicating things, that life wasn't about the image he projected but about the people he surrounded himself with. For the first time in years, Lucas realized he didn't like the man staring back at him in the reflection. When he arrived at the penthouse, the place was dark except for the faint glow of the city filtering through the expansive windows. Emily was curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over her shoulders, her eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. Lucas hesitated in the doorway, guilt knotting his stomach. She looked so small, so out of place in the vastness of their luxurious living room. How had he let things get this far? She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. You're home early. He nodded, loosening his tie and sitting down beside her, leaving a cautious space between them. Yeah, I wasn't feeling it. Emily studied him for a moment before offering a tired smile. I figured. Lucas ran a hand over his face, exhaling deeply. Tonight, you were incredible. She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. I was just doing my job, Lucas. No, he insisted, his voice quieter now. It was more than that. You saved him, and I should have been proud to have you there. Emily turned her gaze back to the television, the flickering light dancing across her face. Lucas, it's okay. I know this isn't my world. I never expected it to be. He felt his chest tighten at her words. Maybe it should have been. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Lucas wanted to apologize, to tell her that he had been selfish, that he had let his insecurities dictate their lives. But where would he even start? "I don't need fancy parties," Emily finally said, her voice gentle but firm. "I don't need validation from strangers in expensive suits. I just need you, Lucas. But I don't know if you need me anymore." His stomach clenched. "Emily, don't say that." She turned to him, and for the first time in a long while, he saw the vulnerability in her eyes. "I mean it. I feel like we've been living in two different worlds for a while now. I don't know if we can fix that." Lucas reached out, taking her hand in his. "We can. I want to try." Emily stared at their intertwined hands for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Then show me, Lucas. Show me I still belong here." He swallowed hard, knowing that words weren't enough anymore. He had been so focused on what the world thought of him that he had forgotten the only opinion that truly mattered. "I will," he promised softly. "I swear I will." As they sat in silence, Lucas realized something with startling clarity. He had spent so long chasing the approval of strangers that he had almost lost the only person who had ever truly seen him. And now, he wasn't sure if he could fix it, but for the first time, he knew he had to try. The next morning, Lucas woke to the sound of Emily moving quietly around the penthouse. The distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen and the faint hum of the coffee machine filled the otherwise silent apartment. He sat up slowly, rubbing a hand over his face, the weight of the previous night pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. He could still see the way Emily had looked at him, calm, composed, but distant. She had always been steady, the anchor in his chaotic world, but last night, for the first time, he had felt that anchor slipping away. Lucas pulled himself out of bed and walked barefoot into the kitchen. Emily stood by the counter, pouring herself a cup of coffee, dressed in a loose cardigan over her scrubs. She looked up when she heard him, offering a small, polite smile. "Morning," she said simply, as if the tension from last night didn't exist. "Morning," Lucas replied, leaning against the counter. He watched her for a moment, noting the quiet tiredness in her eyes. "How's Whitman?" Emily took a sip of her coffee, then set it down. "Stable. They're keeping him under observation, but he should be fine." Lucas nodded, relieved, but unsure of what else to say. "Thanks for, stepping in last night." Emily let out a soft laugh, though there was no humor in it. "It's my job, Lucas. It's what I do." He swallowed hard, realizing how little he had truly appreciated that before. "Yeah, but still, you were amazing." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned to the window, looking out at the city skyline as the morning sun bathed the buildings in gold. "You don't have to say that," she said finally, her voice quieter. "I know how you see me, Lucas. I'm not blind." Lucas tensed. That's not." "It is," she interrupted, turning to face him fully. Her eyes, usually so warm, were filled with something he couldn't quite place. Resignation? Maybe. "You've been ashamed of me for a while now. I see it in the way you look at me when I come home in my scrubs, the way you introduce me at events. Like I'm less." Lucas's throat tightened. "That's not true, isn't it?" she pressed gently, though her words cut deep. "You didn't want me at the gala, Lucas. And honestly, I get it. I don't fit in with your world. But what hurts the most isn't that. I've known it for a while. What hurts is that you don't even see what's wrong with that." Lucas was silent, unable to argue. He had spent so much time chasing perfection, his idea of it, at least, that he hadn't realized the toll it had taken on his marriage. Emily sighed and wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, her fingers tracing the rim. "I love you, Lucas. I always have. But I need to know, do you love me for who I am, or for who you want me to be?" The question hung heavy in the air between them. Lucas wanted to answer right away, to say all the right things, but the words felt stuck in his throat. Finally, Emily sighed, her shoulders sinking. "I have to go. My shift starts soon." "Emily, wait," Lucas said, stepping forward, but she held up a hand. "Lucas, I need some time to think." Her eyes softened, and she gave him a small, sad smile. I think you do too. Before he could respond, she grabbed her keys and slipped out the door, leaving Lucas standing in the middle of their kitchen, feeling more alone than he ever had before. The day passed in a blur. Lucas tried to focus at work, throwing himself into meetings and calls, but his mind kept drifting back to Emily. Every time he looked at his phone, hoping for a message from her, it remained silent. At lunch, Richard Sinclair found him sitting alone in the executive lounge, staring into his untouched coffee. "You look like hell," Richard said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. Lucas let out a dry laugh. "Thanks." Richard leaned back, studying him. "I heard about last night. Emily really stepped up, huh?" Lucas nodded slowly. "Yeah, she did." There was a beat of silence before Richard spoke again, his voice softer than usual. "You know, Lucas, I get it. It's easy to get caught up in all of this." He gestured vaguely around the luxurious room. "But at the end of the day, none of it means anything if you don't have someone real by your side." Lucas sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not that simple, Richard, isn't it?" Richard countered. "Emily's a good woman. You're lucky to have her. Don't screw it up." Lucas didn't respond. He knew Richard was right, but fixing things wasn't as easy as admitting he had been wrong. That evening, Lucas returned to an empty penthouse. The silence was deafening, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of it. He walked through the room slowly, his footsteps echoing in the space that suddenly felt too big, too cold. He ended up in the bedroom, staring at the framed wedding photo on the nightstand. Emily's smile in the picture was so full of hope, of love. Lucas swallowed hard, a pang of guilt hitting him square in the chest. Pulling out his phone, he hovered over Emily's contact. He started typing. I'm sorry. I should have never made you feel like you weren't enough. I was wrong. You mean more to me than any gala or business deal ever could." He stared at the words for a long moment before hitting send. A few minutes passed, and his phone buzzed with a response. "I know you're sorry, Lucas, but words aren't enough anymore. I need actions." Lucas exhaled, running a hand over his face. He had spent so long prioritizing the wrong things. His image, his reputation, his career, while slowly pushing Emily away. If he wanted to fix things, he needed to start now. Lucas glanced around the penthouse, feeling the emptiness settle into his bones. For the first time, he realized that all the wealth and success in the world meant nothing without Emily by his side. He grabbed his coat and keys, a new determination settling over him. If actions were what she needed, then that's exactly what he would give her. Lucas found himself standing outside the hospital, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his coat, the cold night air biting at his skin. The bright neon lights above the entrance cast a sterile glow, and he could see glimpses of nurses and doctors rushing inside, their lives consumed by purpose in a way he could hardly comprehend. Emily was in there somewhere, doing what she did best, caring for people, saving lives, while he stood outside, unsure of how to bridge the growing gap between them. He had spent years building his empire, carefully crafting his image, yet now, standing in front of this place that meant everything to her, he realized just how little he had truly understood about the woman he had married. Taking a deep breath, he walked through the sliding doors, the scent of antiseptic and coffee greeting him. He felt out of place in his expensive suit, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor as he approached the reception desk. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked without looking up, her voice tired but polite. "I'm looking for Emily Donovan," Lucas said, his voice lower than he intended. "She's a nurse here." The receptionist finally glanced up, her eyes flicking over him with mild interest. "Nurse Donovan is on her rounds. You can wait over there." Lucas nodded, stepping aside and taking a seat in the waiting area. He glanced around at the people sitting nearby. Worried families, exhausted patients, nurses moving swiftly from one task to another. This was Emily's world, a world that he had never truly stepped into. Minutes passed, and Lucas felt the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. He wondered what Emily would think when she saw him here, whether she would be annoyed or simply exhausted by his presence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she appeared down the hallway, her scrubs slightly wrinkled, a clipboard in hand. She looked tired, but even now, There was a quiet determination in her posture that Lucas couldn't help but admire. She spotted him almost instantly, surprise flashing across her face before she composed herself. Approaching him cautiously, she crossed her arms. "Lucas, what are you doing here?" He stood, feeling uncharacteristically awkward. "I wanted to see you," he said simply, searching her face for any sign of warmth. "I needed to talk," Emily sighed, glancing around the busy corridor. "Lucas, I'm in the middle of a shift. This isn't exactly the best time." "I know," he said quickly. I had to see you. I had to tell you that I'm sorry. For everything." Her expression softened slightly, but there was still a guardedness in her eyes. "Lucas, I appreciate that, but words aren't enough anymore. I need more than apologies." "I know," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion, "and I want to do better. I realize now that I've been so focused on what other people think, on building this perfect image, that I forgot what really matters." Emily watched him carefully, her fingers tightening around the clipboard she held. "And what do you think really matters, Lucas?" He swallowed hard. "You do, Em. You always have." A moment of silence stretched between them, the hum of the hospital filling the void. Emily exhaled, shaking her head with a tired smile. "Lucas, I've never needed you to be perfect. I just needed you to be present. To see me, not just as your wife, but as a person." Lucas nodded slowly. "I see that now, and I want to be better. I want to understand your world, the way you've always tried to understand mine." Emily studied him for a long moment before sighing. "It's not going to be easy, Lucas. You can't just say these things and expect everything to be okay overnight." "I don't expect that," he said quickly, "but I'm willing to try. Whatever it takes, I'll do it." She glanced down the hall, checking the time. "I have to get back to work," she said softly, "but I appreciate you coming here." "That's a start." Lucas felt a small flicker of hope. "It's not just a start, Em. It's a promise." Emily nodded slowly. "We'll see." Later that night, back at the penthouse, Lucas sat in his study, the city lights twinkling outside. He pulled out his laptop, staring at the spreadsheets and reports that once held his entire focus. But now, they felt insignificant. For the first time in years, he realized how much of his life had been spent chasing things that didn't matter. Money, power, status, while neglecting the one thing that truly did. The sound of the front door opening made him look up. Emily walked in, her face still carrying the exhaustion of the long shift, but there was a softness in her expression that hadn't been there before. "You're still up," she said, slipping off her coat and setting her bag down. "Yeah," Lucas replied, closing the laptop. "Couldn't sleep." She hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. "I meant what I said earlier, Lucas. If you want things to change, it's going to take more than words." He nodded. "I know, and I'm ready to prove it," Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Okay," she said finally. "Then let's start with something simple. Come with me to the hospital tomorrow. I want you to see what I do. Really see it." Lucas blinked, surprised by the offer, but he nodded without hesitation. "I'd like that." For the first time in a long time, Emily smiled, small, tentative, but real. The next day, Lucas walked through the hospital corridors beside Emily, observing everything with new eyes. He watched as she comforted a scared child, reassured an anxious family, and worked alongside her colleagues with unwavering dedication. He realized then how wrong he had been to think she didn't belong in his world. It wasn't that she didn't fit. It was that his world had never been enough to contain her greatness. Lucas had always thought strength was measured in power and influence. But Emily's strength, her quiet resilience, her compassion, was something far greater. That evening, as they walked home together, Lucas reached for her hand, holding it tightly in his. "I see it now," he said softly. "What you do, who you are. It's incredible, Emily. I was a fool not to see it before." Emily looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, he saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Then don't just see it, Lucas. Be part of it." And for the first time in his life, Lucas Donovan knew exactly what he needed to do. Lucas Donovan sat alone in his penthouse living room, the city lights flickering outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. He stared at his phone, Emily's last message still glowing on the screen. "I need actions, not words." Her words echoed in his mind, a stark reminder of how far they had drifted apart. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration gnawing at him. He had spent years building his business empire, obsessing over his image and what people thought of him. He had convinced himself that success required sacrifice, but sitting here now, in the silence of their once warm home, he realized that he had sacrificed the wrong things. Emily's absence was palpable. He missed her presence. The way she filled the room with her quiet kindness, the way she hummed softly when she was cooking, the way she would curl up on the couch with a book, completely absorbed in another world. Lucas had been too blind, too caught up in his ambition to see that those little things were what made life meaningful. His phone vibrated in his hand, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a notification from the hospital's community outreach page. Emily's name was mentioned in a post, thanking her for her tireless efforts in organizing a blood donation drive. Lucas clicked on it, scrolling through photos of her smiling with colleagues, her face lighting up in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. She looked happy, and it hurt him to realize that she had found fulfillment without him. Something inside him stirred, an urgency, a need to fix what he had broken. He couldn't just let her go, not without fighting for their marriage. The next morning, Lucas found himself outside the hospital where Emily worked. It was early, just past sunrise, and the streets were slowly coming to life. He stood by the entrance, watching nurses and doctors shuffle in, their eyes heavy with fatigue, but their steps purposeful. This world was so different from his own. A world of compassion, sacrifice, and quiet heroism. Emily emerged through the doors, her hair pulled back into a loose bun, dark circles under her eyes from the overnight shift. When she saw him standing there, her steps slowed, surprise flickering across her face. "Lucas?" she asked, adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder. "What are you doing here?" He took a hesitant step forward, his throat dry. I wanted to see you. I wanted to talk." She studied him for a long moment before sighing. "Lucas, I'm exhausted. I don't have the energy for another conversation that goes nowhere." "I know," he said quickly, desperation creeping into his voice. I want to show you that I can change. That I am changing." Emily frowned, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "And how do you plan on doing that?" Lucas swallowed, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Let me see your world, Emily. Really see it. Let me volunteer, shadow you, whatever it takes. I want to understand what matters to you." She blinked, clearly taken aback by his request. "You want to volunteer? Here." He nodded, determination hardening his jaw. "Yes. I need to know what I've been missing all these years. I need to understand you." Emily stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she let out a slow breath and nodded. "Fine," she said. "Meet me here tomorrow morning. 6 a.m. sharp." Lucas smiled, relief washing over him. "I'll be here." The next day, Lucas arrived early, dressed in a plain shirt and slacks, a far cry from his usual designer attire. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and coffee, and as he stood by the front desk, he felt out of place. Emily appeared moments later, handing him a volunteer badge. "You're going to be shadowing me today?" she said simply, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Lucas nodded, following her through the bustling hallways. He watched as she moved with ease, checking on patients, chatting with coworkers, offering words of comfort to worried families. He saw the way people responded to her, with gratitude, with trust. At one point, they entered a room where an elderly woman was struggling to sit up. Without hesitation, Emily stepped in, adjusting the pillows and speaking to her with warmth and kindness. Lucas stood by the door, watching in awe. "You do this every day?" he asked quietly. Emily glanced at him and nodded. "Yes. And it's not just about the medical part, Lucas. It's about people." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. "I never realized." Emily gave him a small smile. "I know." The day was long and exhausting, but for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in years, purpose beyond profit margins. As he handed out meal trays, listened to patient stories, and watched Emily work tirelessly, he realized just how much he had missed out on. Later that evening, as they walked out of the hospital together, Lucas turned to her, his expression serious. "Emily, I don't know how you do it, but I want to support you. For real this time." Emily looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "Lucas, I'm not asking you to change overnight. I just need to know you're willing to try." He reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "I am. More than anything." For the first time in a long while, Emily smiled. It wasn't the wide, glowing smile he used to know, but it was real. Over the next few weeks, Lucas continued to show up, not just at the hospital, but in their marriage. He scaled back on late nights at the office, made time for dinners at home, and even started attending Emily's community events. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, Emily leaned her head against his shoulder. "You're really trying, Lucas," she murmured. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You deserve it, Em. You always did." They still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt hopeful. He had spent years chasing an illusion of success, but now he realized that true success wasn't found in wealth or status. It was found in the quiet, meaningful moments with the woman he loved. And he wasn't going to let them slip away again.